Good day, my name is Ian van Vuren. I'm a strategic planning consultant. The purpose of this course, called Strategy as Art and Science, is to provide the learner with the principles and the methodology underlying strategy development and planning in both the private and the public sectors. And it is a course aimed at South and Southern Africa specifically, but not exclusively so. Now, as far as the specific content is concerned, you'll see there's a large number of lectures broken down into 4 modules. This is not a course for junior managers. This course is aimed at senior management and top-level management, although the first couple of lectures, 1, 2, 3, does give a bit of background into what strategy is and strategizing contains, but in general it is a course that is focused primarily on senior management. As you can see, there are 4 modules. We start at the top right with module 1 and 2. This lecture 1, lecture 2 and 3 in fact focuses on strategy development in context. So first, module 1 and 2 deals with developing the organization's strategy. After that, we move on to module 3, which is developing the strategic plan in more detail. Module 3, which is everything to do with execution, because we find that many companies do quite well with modules 1 and 2. They do even well with module 3 implementation, but when it comes to execution, they tend to fall flat. And the general statistics that is quoted nowadays is that at least 75% of strategies are not successfully implemented. And then parallel to module 3, we also have a module 4, develop the risk management plan, because this is something that most organizations do not take cognizance of when they develop their strategic plan and their strategy, but it is of critical importance, and it's critically important that it is embedded in and made part of the strategic plan of the company. So let's talk a bit about background as far as strategy and strategic planning is concerned. And for the moment, you'll notice I use the concepts interchangeably, which is not quite correct, but I'll talk a bit about that a bit later. Now, firstly, it's important to understand that most strategy failures are not attributable to a lack of process. I just mentioned that about 75% of organization strategies are not implemented or successfully implemented. This is not because there's a lack of process. In fact, most organizations follow the book, so to speak, on strategy management and utilize many resources to communicate the strategy. Use resources to translate the strategy into objectives, to cascade the objectives down the hierarchy, to develop action plans to achieve these objectives, to measure progress through KPIs or whatever other measure they use, and to reward performances, etc. So those things are in place, and there are various tools and methodologies to do strategy and strategic planning. However, what is lacking in most cases is an appreciation of the fact that strategy and strategy management is not pure science. This is why this course is called Strategy as Art and Science. Strategy is about changing organizations. I mean, after all, organizations are composed of people. They have a natural inclination to dislike and even resist change. That's why resistance to change and change management are such popular topics nowadays. So that means that strategy development and implementation must also cover changing people's mindsets and attitudes. So since people aren't robots and no two people are alike, the people management side of strategy development requires soft skills. And this is where the art of strategy management comes into play. The science part is well established, and there are countless books available on the subject, and we'll deal with them in this and especially lectures 2 and 3. So therefore then, the topic of this course, strategy is art and science, because a proper approach to strategic thinking and planning must embody both. Now, the concept of strategy goes back a long way. Let's discuss that already. The term strategos finds its origin in the Greek term, or the term strategy rather, finds its origin in the Greek term strategos, which means the art of the general. So in its initial meaning, it had a military slant, and that was indeed the case for many years until a relatively short period ago. Now, the earliest reference to something that may be referred to as strategy can be found in the Chinese general Sun Tzu's The Art of War. And already in the 5th century BC, Sun Tzu wrote, "In peace prepare for war, and in war prepare for peace." The art of war is of vital importance to the state. It is a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or ruin. Hence it is a subject of inquiry which can on no account be neglected. So Sun Tzu was a master of what we refer to nowadays as a so-called indirect strategy. That is to try and avoid war, trying to win the war by in fact avoiding war. And that is very succinctly encased in the following maxim, also attributable to Sun Tzu. Hence, to fight and conquer in all your battles is not the supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. And Blue Ocean Strategy, which we'll talk about a bit later in this course, is an example of the indirect approach to strategy in modern business thinking. Now, the Prussian military thinker Karl von Clausewitz is widely acknowledged as the most important of the classical strategic thinkers. He's most famous for his military treatise Vom Kriege, or On War then. He served in the Rhine campaign roughly about 1793 to 1794, when the Prussian army invaded France during the French Revolution. And he also served in the Napoleonic Wars about 1806 to 1815. Now, von Clausewitz stressed the dialectic interaction of diverse factors, noting how unexpected developments unfolding under the so-called fog of war, meaning in the face of incomplete, dubious, and often completely erroneous information and high levels of fear, doubt, and excitement, that this calls for rapid decision by commandos. So under this type of situation, the fog of war, the military decision maker still needs to make rapid decisions. And he saw history as a vital check on erudite abstractions that did not accord with experience. So in contrast to the early work of, for instance, Jomini, he argued that war could not be quantified or reduced to map work, geometry, and graphs. So there is he shared a lot in his thinking with Sun Tzu in this regard as well. Now, von Clausewitz had many sayings, of which the most famous is, "War is the continuation of politics by other means." And in modern history, von Clausewitz's influence can be seen in the United States nuclear deterrence strategy, specifically MAD, mutually assured destruction, followed since the 1950s with the belief that the best way to deter a nuclear global war is to have the ability to engage in one. Now, a disciple of von Clausewitz whose theory of war was more an effort to grasp its essential nature rather than that of Jomini, which reduced it to facts and figures. Helmut von Moltke regarded strategy as a practical art of adapting means to ends. And he developed the methods of Napoleon in accordance with altered conditions of his age. He was the first to realize the great defensive power of modern firearms and had inferred from it that an enveloping attack had become more formidable than the attempt to pierce an enemy's front. So that's also a form of the indirect approach, and we saw that form of warfare perfected to a large extent, for instance, by the Zulus in the early 19th century in southern Africa. Von Moltke's main thesis was that military strategy had to be understood as a system of options, since only the beginning of a military operation was plannable. So he also, to an extent, although they did not use the term at that stage, focused on the concept of having different scenarios and strategies in place for various scenarios. So as a result, he considered the main task of military leaders to consist in the extensive preparation of all possible outcomes. To a large extent, von Moltke can be seen as the father of alternate future thinking. And his thesis can be summed up by the following statement: no plan survives contact or first contact with the enemy. Let's look at some of these quotes that I just mentioned to you. Those are the two quotes that I mentioned by Sun Tzu. So, in peace, prepare for war; in war, prepare for peace. And the indirect strategy, supreme excellence, consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. Von Clausewitz, war is a continuation of politics by other means. Then von Moltke's statement that no plan survives first contact with the enemy, amongst others due to also Clausewitz's thesis of the fog of war. So you can plan for just about every contingency, but when things start flying around you, your plans have to be rapidly adapted. Now let's look at a couple of definitions on strategy. The aim of this lecture is really not to delve into definitions, because there are hundreds of definitions of strategy and strategic planning. Just a couple. Jay Lowen, this is a South African author, one of the few female authors, incidentally, on strategy, says that strategy is a process to lead change. So just in that small sentence, two important concepts. It is a process. There has to be some sort of formal process, and it is aimed at changing something within your environment, within your organization. Then she says you need a view of the future, so there is an aspect of future thinking, scenario thinking in it, and then an understanding of the sort of skills or competencies necessary to operate in that future. So thinking about what are the core competencies that your organization and your people need to be able to operate in this future vision of an organization that you. Pfeiffer, amongst others, says that strategic planning is a process, again, the process by which the guiding members, meaning really management and leadership of an organization, envisage its future, again, a focus on future thinking, and develops the necessary procedures and operations to achieve that future. Now, an important thing that comes visible when analyzing these two approaches is that the terms strategy and strategic planning are used interchangeably. I mean, Lowen speaks about strategy, Pfeiffer speaks about strategic planning. Later in the course, more focus will be given to this aspect, but for now the terms are used interchangeably, although, as will become evident later, there is a marked difference. The one refers to an intellectual exercise, that is strategy, while the other refers to the output, or strategic planning rather, while the other refers to the output of that exercise, i.e. the strategy. Now, for our purposes of this presentation and also for subsequent lectures, the definition of strategy by Johnson and Scholes will suffice. Strategy is the direction and scope of an organization over the long term. So it sets the direction, the extent, the scope, and it's got a long-term vision, which achieves advantage for the organization, so advantage in terms of its competitors, if you wish, through its configuration of resources. So there's a focus on resource utilization and optimization within a challenging environment. So it acknowledges that the organization operates within an environment to meet the needs of markets and to fulfill stakeholder expectations. These stakeholders, be they shareholders, if you're a PTY limited type of organization, but there are many stakeholders that an organization has, from the management, the leadership, the employees in the company, the public out there, etc. So indeed, many stakeholders. So if we talk about strategy, then in a few other aspects about the concept of strategy. Firstly, strategy is all about where is the business trying to go or to get to in the long term. What is the direction that needs to be set? That's why any exercise in strategic planning and strategy setting needs to be 5 to 10 years, needs to reach 5 to 10 years into the future. Secondly, which markets should a business compete in and what kind of activities are involved in such markets? So what are the markets and what are the scopes? And this is all going to be determined by the type of organization that you are, Are you a conglomerate? Are you a holding company, a specific business unit or a department within an organization, etc.? Thirdly, how can the business perform better than the competition in those markets? So what are our core competitive advantages that we have? Again, when we come to blue ocean type thinking, this is where you really think out of the box. Next, what resources, many types of resources as listed there, are required in order to be able to compete? Then what external environmental factors affect the business's ability to compete? So in the environment, what are the factors that, the external environment generally is composed of a specific environment that is much closer to you, that's normally your specific competitors, your suppliers, etc. And then you have a general environment out there, which consists of many dimensions, but normally the well-known PESTEL E type of dimensions like politics, economics, social, technological, ecological, legal. There could be a few others depending on the type of organization that you're operating. And then what are the values and expectations of those who have power in and around the business? So those are the stakeholders that we spoke of. So if the above then are the outputs of strategy, then undertaking any strategic planning exercise in an organization is done with the following objectives in mind in pursuit of the strategy and the strategy outputs. So this is why you do this whole thing called strategic planning. Firstly, to control your future, to take command of your future, because you're living in this volatile environment. Doesn't matter what type of company you're operating in or organization you're operating in, to a larger or a lesser extent, you must take control of this future. And you can. Many people would tell you that the environment cannot be influenced. This is not true. You can influence certain aspects of the environment, or at least you can make certain assumptions about what is going to happen in the environment and tailor-make your strategy according to that. Secondly, to focus your people, to give them some sort of direction to operate within this turbulent environment. It's not just the case of getting to work every day and then going home without knowing where it is that we're really heading to over the long term. Thirdly, to grow leadership skills, because strategy and strategic planning is an exercise in showing leadership. That's why I'm a great believer in involving relatively junior people in strategic planning exercises, because it is an education process, A. B, they get to understand how senior management's heads work, what they like, what they don't like, what their vision is, and it's also part of their education process, because obviously they are the leaders of the future. The fourth point is to improve communication, because if you develop strategic planning properly and you implement your strategy properly within an organization, a la according to, for instance, balanced scorecard, then there needs to be a formal communication process in place so that the person down to the lowest level can see how he or she is contributing to the execution of the strategy. That doesn't happen by itself. It needs a proper communication system or approach in place, and once again, the type of communication will depend on the type of organization that you work in. If it's a highly technical, technologically advanced type of organization, possibly you could use more written communications, emails, etc., to communicate the vision. If it's a much more practical, hands-on type of environment, then you need to have face-to-face interaction with the people on the factory floor, so to speak, to convey the vision. And then lastly, to regain or to gain that entrepreneurial spirit, just to make people feel again that they are there for a reason and the job is really worth doing. Lastly, the ultimate aim really is to gain a competitive advantage, not only over your potential competitors, but also over the environment and market in general, as I will explain a bit later in Blue Ocean Strategy. So in the final analysis, the only real competitive advantage that an organization can have is to have better people who understand the business better and who seek the future with a passion. And this is where real leadership comes into play. Just a bit of a bibliography. There are some of the sources that all the sources that I utilized for putting this slideshow together. You're more than welcome to go and read up on them in much more detail if you would like to. Thank you.